All right. Hi, everyone who watches this. It's another live stream for my channel, Mindgasms. I'm going to talk to my friend Devendra today, who I got to know through the Mixed Mental Arts chats. And we're probably going to talk about topics like politics, culture, and psychology, and how the authors Thomas Sowell and Jonathan Haidt, who are an economist and a social psychologist, respectively, how they contribute to these topics. So, Devendra, why don't you just say a little bit about yourself there?
Uh, hey guys, my name is Devendra. Um, yeah, I met Andrew on the Mixed Mental Arts chat group, um, and actually, I, I totally uh, thought it was really cool that you reached out to me because in the live chats that we did on the Mixed Mental Arts group, I really appreciated your points of views, and sometimes I feel like those chats can get like really tangential and whatnot, but um I feel like you always kind of like had your eye on whatever we were talking about pretty, you know, you were pertinent to the topic or whatever, which I thought was like pretty awesome.
Oh, thanks,
Um
man.
yeah, dude. So anyway, uh I live in a bus, which is kind of my whole thing or whatever. That's like sort of afforded me the opportunity to start like educating myself, with the internet and whatnot. Um, yeah, over the past few years, I've been, feel like a freshman in college or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty cool that we can do that now. And I mean, this is exactly what we're doing right here with the live stream, which yeah, I think that's pretty dope.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have pretty much same goals with this as we have with mixed mental arts, just talking to people and trying to learn more, basically.
Yeah, I've actually been uh really interested in putting out a podcast, but I'm kind of like having trouble like narrowing a topic down so that it's not like just all over the place. I mean, it could always be like Joe Rogan, but then at the same time, like you know, it's kind of tough to like get a crowd if you don't have like a niche. Anyway,
Yeah, mine's
thoughts
mine's
I've been
pretty
thinking about.
much all over the place so far. Like I talk about lots of different things and I've talked to lots of different people. I've gotten more attention so far from talking like I talked to a philosophy professor recently, so that got a lot more attention than some of my other stuff.
Nice.
So but I'm looking forward to talking to just lots of different people, and hopefully as I talk to like more popular people, I guess you could say, or people who have more more
Like,
societal status and stuff
yeah,
like
yeah,
that, that'll get
totally.
me more attention. And yeah, I'll talk to you when you start yours too, for sure, man.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, exactly what the premise is because it's kind of like you know I'm living in a bus, and it's like I want to sort of tell people why I'm living in a bus, which is like a whole philosophy and whatnot. But at the same time, it's like I'm also like I have all these thoughts about all the random shit that that I'm like looking into or whatever, and I don't have like a group of people like that like physically that I can talk to because I've got friends, but kind of have like best friends in like cities here and there. So it's like I just want to like be able to talk about the shit that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it's cool. That sounds similar to me. Like I have a bunch of friends, but most of them don't live in the same place as me anymore. So that's one of the things that I appreciate a lot about mixed mental arts too, just getting to like talk to like-minded people about similar topics. And yeah,
Yeah,
I like basically just sharing my ideas about a lot of stuff on my YouTube channel too. And Yeah, that's what like you could maybe call your podcast something like Bus Wisdom or Wisdom from a Bus or something like that.
Well, I kind of have I have this like brand like name or whatever for my my Instagram and whatnot, but it's van life with woodpecker, which is like
Oh, that's that thing that you sent me the invite for on Facebook that I didn't accept yet. I haven't
yeah,
gotten
yeah,
around to it.
Facebook page. Sorry, there's a train going by behind me. Can't hear it. Thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's gone now.
Um. Uh. Oh yeah, van life with woodpecker. So it's a play on words from a Tom Robbins book, which is called Still Life with Woodpecker, and it's about like a
Oh, okay.
couple of redheads that like were sort of like outlaws, so to speak. So um, I like that. That was one of my favorite books, and that's like I just like sort of came up with that play on words one day and thought it like fit pretty good or whatever. So that's kind of the name or whatever. But yeah.
Cool,
So I
man.
got to incorporate something about the van life into the podcast, which I mean, I figure like if I do a YouTube, I could have like stuff about like little short videos about living in a bus, but podcast would be like more about my thoughts and shit.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's kind of similar. Well, I guess like for my channel here so far, like for in terms of that kind of stuff, I tend to just like make shorter videos, basically just me talking about ideas, and then recently I got to start talking to people on my channel too, like conversations like this.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean that's super dope. Well, did you have something in particular you wanted to start with topic wise or whatever?
Yeah, I guess we talk about like maybe just like politics and culture generally and how like I think it seems like one thing that you and I seem to have in common is that we kind of notice a whole lot of naive realism around about people in terms of politics and culture. And it seems like even and I'm not trying to call anyone out because we all do this. That's the point. That's the point that Jonathan Haidt makes in Righteous Mind, right? That everyone is really biased and ideological about our own political mindsets and just ways of looking at the world. But it seems like we often like call people out, both of us kind of call people out on that sometimes, and sometimes they get like really mad at us.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. I think like sometimes like I have trouble because I come off like I think I come off a little preachy sometimes unintentionally, and that's
Yeah, I think
partially
that about myself sometimes too.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes you know what you're talking about, but also there's like a skill to like communication, and that's something that like I feel like most all of us do really horribly, but it's something that I've always like thought about, and like I was the asshole like correcting my friends all the time, and I wasn't like a grammar Nazi. I was like a you meant to say this Nazi, so like and my friend's response was always, you knew what I meant. But it's like half the time that's what the arguments were about was because somebody didn't know what you meant. And so, speaking really like in like using the Socratic like logical way of speaking where you start with a premise and you finish with a conclusion, get your point across a lot better than the way most people just don't really think about it as like a skill that you can get better at.
Yeah, definitely. And like trying to communicate better with people is definitely something that I always try to improve at too. And I've found that like since I've become I think anyway that I've become kind of less arrogant than I used to be, or at least that's something that I'm always working on. It's kind of helped me develop my communication skills a little bit better. like I used to be a militant atheist for a while, and then I gradually just started like I eventually became friends with Hayden Bruce, for example, who's now a Christian in mixed mental arts. And now the way I look at religion is that I don't believe in God, but if someone has a different belief about it, then that doesn't really matter at all unless they use that belief as an excuse to try to hurt someone else. And that usually encompasses almost no one. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. So, just having a different belief doesn't like hurt anybody. Everybody can believe something different and it doesn't actually like affect anybody. So there's no point in like being militant about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Um
one thing that that reminded me of is during your cultural confession on that mixed mental arts white belt chat, when you were talking about how you noticed that people are so like heavily against Trump that they think that he's like a Nazi, and and you were like, I know people who voted for Trump and they don't seem like bad people for voting for him to me.
right, right. Well, I mean, however many people voted for him, you think like that there's that many Nazis around, Like I mean, I just think that like the words that are getting thrown around or whatever are like a little like defeating to the purpose, like you start calling everybody a Nazi and then like what happens when you like meet a real Nazi or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the boy cried wolf scenario.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing too is like, I actually like I didn't really like know that much about Trump or his campaign because I don't at the time I was like working a restaurant job where I, didn't spend much time looking at the news or whatever. And I was kind of like in favor of Bernie more than anybody. But um I thought it was funny that he was running, and then, it just kept getting bigger and bigger or whatever. But I had heard all these fucking crazy things about him, so I went and like looked up half of the shit that people have said about him, because everyone was talking about how much of like a homophobe he is and whatnot. So one day I went to the LGBTQ website and they had a list of the top 10 worst things that um Trump has said against anybody of that community or whatever. And they were all extremely like unrelated, but the worst one was that he said he didn't really have much of an opinion on the whole gay rights issue, or like he didn't really care that much. It wasn't like a thing to him. So,
That's
so,
like a libertarian position, basically.
it's like I don't give a fuck what you do. Like he did. I mean, and I'm not defending him for anything. It's just like the way they scream about him being like the worst person in the world, and it's like, I don't see like him, like going after gay people or anything like that. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's just when you hate the guy, you just want to point out everything, even though he's not that much crazier than most people, other than the fact that he's like a ridiculous character.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think that he's selfish but not evil. It kind of reminds me of like how I found myself like defending people that I don't even really agree with that much lately. Like I've defended Trump and Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, and you saw me defending Thomas Sowell too. And like other than Thomas Sowell, well, actually, no, Jordan Peterson too. I agree with both of them about a lot of things, but not everything. But with all of them, I've like seen a lot of people just basically not only say things like not only do they disagree with these people are also evil, useless idiots with no valuable contribution to society at all.
Right, and like totally willfully ignorant and things like that. But um, you know, my stance on Jordan Peterson is just that like the majority of what he says isn't any different than something like your grandfather would have told you. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not like cutting edge like psychology that he's come up with. It's like new and goes it's it's kind of like, you know, traditional values to a certain degree, but you know, he's also like talking about the psychological issues that affect people, and people don't want to hear that a lot of times, you know. So he's saying that, you know, some of the like hot button items is like when he says that, like, you know, wearing makeup in the workplace generates attraction or whatever, right? And I mean, regardless of whether girls are doing that on purpose or not, if a girl looks prettier with makeup on, then, you know, that's going to have like an effect to a certain degree. And I think that's all he's ever saying, but people make it sound like he's saying that uh that like women are doing it intentionally, and the fact that they're doing it means that that women and men should not be working in the same environment. And that um I remember in the Vice interview, somebody like they sort of like uh made it look like he was saying that men and women shouldn't work in the workplace together. But it was more like the
Yeah.
guy kept pressing him on all these questions, asking him to like say what he would have instead or something like that. And he's just like, I don't know. I'm just pointing out that these are like psychological tendencies that people have. But they made it look like he was saying, like, I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah, like the people we all tend to like add our own implications to what people say. Maybe some people more than most about certain people, like Jordan Peterson, for example, and like they do like they people do that with like Ben Shapiro and Thomas Sowell and Trump and stuff like that too. And like the thing with with Ben Shapiro for me is that I'm not a conservative, but I I have no problem with people choosing to be conservative, and if they have conservative positions that I disagree with, if they articulate them well, then I still have a lot of respect for that person. And so that's why I kind of like Ben Shapiro. I don't agree with that many of his political opinions, but if you actually listen to the
Really good.
details of what he says, he's good at making good arguments, and he seems pretty libertarian about most of the things that I disagree with him about. But a lot of other people, including people who I consider smarter than me, seem to have this huge problem with him and think that he's like morally bad and has nothing useless to say or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems is a lot of people don't like you know, I thought we learned to go past the headline already. Like I thought we learned that the headlines were a fucking trick, right? But I still think a lot of people don't bother to read shit. So and I mean, not even that they're not they don't even care about the article, right? All they know, for a vast sum of people, not the hardcore haters, but the people who just like don't really know that much about them, all they know is like the random headlines they've seen. So if they lean one side or the other, they only see one side's like headlines. So the headlines are either like, you know, the the media tries to spin Peterson's words again, but it comes back to bite him in the ass, or you hear like Peterson's misogyny is like, you know, this, that, or the other, you know. So it's like even if you're not like bothering to read the articles because you have no interest in reading them, you're still like, it's just like the subtleties of advertising, right? Where like you subconsciously are getting like berated with certain images, and then one day you need something, and what pops into your head but that particular like jingle or whatever, you know. So it's kind of like you don't really have any thoughts on Jordan Peterson, but when the subject comes up, like you don't know anything about him, you just know what like certain people say about him, which is either they love him or him.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
Because
And
aside
that
from the internet, I haven't really talked to that many people who like know or give a fuck about Jordan Peterson. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, actually, that's the same for me too. Like I talk to a lot of people who know as much as me, or almost as much as me, or more than me about Jordan Peterson on the internet. But then when I go out to into the real world and talk with real people in actual like physical face-to-face conversations, or even like texting some of my friends or something like that, sometimes they don't know who Jordan Peterson is.
Yeah. It's same thing with Ben Shapiro. I mean, my dad actually. So I grew up with my dad being a real old school conservative. You know, like small government conservative or whatever. And and I swung really far left as soon as I got out of the house. And I actually left the house in high school because of we had like a rough relationship and whatnot. So um I kind of like had to make it on my own, and you know, left the values on the left clearly like um made more sense to me or whatever, you know. But it's like I mentioned to my dad this like or like I sent him a link or something with Ben Shapiro just because I figured he would appreciate the guy more than me, you know. And he didn't even know who he was or whatever, you know. And I'm like, and this is the guy who like forced me to listen to fucking Rush Limbaugh like for hours at a time in the car, like when I was in middle school, you know, and I hated that shit.
Yeah, the the like extremists or fundamentalists in any political ideology are always the most annoying ones. Like the authoritarian progressives on the left and like the authoritarian, I don't know, alt-right people or whatever you would call them on the right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I've always been fairly like opposed to politics until more recently because I saw it as not being like very meaningful in my life. You know, I had bigger fish to fry. I was like, you know, out on my own when I was 17 or whatever, like, and got cut off from my parents because we ended our relationship poorly, you know. So like, you know, I didn't really find that like politics was going to affect my life enough for me to like exert any effort into it, you know. But so past few years I've definitely like moved around in my political beliefs and whatnot, and so it's hard for me um to both like judge other people's like political beliefs or whatever, you know, because I don't even know if what I think today will be anything similar to what I think in, you know, a couple years. But at the same time, um, I don't really like give authority to anyone's opinion if it's one that they've like been given and held their entire life. You know, if you've always been doing this because like that's the way you were born and raised, then it doesn't really mean anything to me because you don't believe it because you came to that decision on your own necessarily, you know. Not to say that like the only good like the only people who know what they're thinking like have gone from one way to the next. I'm not saying that, but it's kind of like, you know, you, uh a therapist who has gone through and fought like anxiety and depression and that sort of thing is a much better qualified therapist that's not had the same like problems to go through, right? So I
Yeah,
feel
that
like
makes
that's kind of
sense.
like a What's that?
That makes sense.
I feel like it's kind of like parallel or whatever, like to our like ability to learn requires us to like go through like the experiences and to make the mistakes and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and totally. And like in terms of politics, like Um, I guess I was probably more, I was basically, I kind of, when I actually started learning about politics when I was an adult, I kind of found out that my parents raised me as kind of progressive without really even telling me about it. So then I eventually started actually learning about different political philosophies. And I basically, I would say that now I'm kind of like a centrist. I kind of was like really extremely classical liberal or really extremely libertarian, if that's even a thing at one point. But like the interesting thing that I found when I was learning about politics is that yeah, progressives and liberals, of course, have make good points, and but then the people on the conservative side of things, they're not really as bad as I thought they were, perhaps. And maybe like, and then more gradually, more recently, just came to the conclusion that uh, I don't like to be loyal to any one particular political philosophy. I think all of them make good points. Some of them make more good points than others for me, and but they all make bad points too. And yeah, my perspective on politics is often changing at least slightly. Like I see more value in this thing and more value in another thing, and I try to just make it change based on new evidence and kind of follow the scientific method about it, basically.
Yeah. Well, I also think that a lot of people get hung up thinking that the other side cares about different things. Like one side cares about money, while the other side cares about helping the poor, and the side that cares about money doesn't want to help the poor, and the side that wants to help the poor, like doesn't approve of you know the business practices of the rich and that sort of thing. But not the politicians. I'm not talking about them, because they all like have a job, and so they're doing what they're doing in order to make money, right? They're not doing it necessarily because it'll help everybody. I mean, obviously they have a constituency, but we all know that like lobbyists are doing, they're running the show behind the scenes or whatever, right? But so as far as the general public go and whatnot, I think that everybody actually wants the same things, but they just see the mechanism to getting there as being different, right? So like the conservatives will argue that um if you give somebody something, if if you give a man a fish, they'll eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, they'll you know be able to survive on their own for their life or whatever, right? So their idea is that if you don't facilitate them, or like if you don't necessarily give them a helping hand, then they'll have to climb out of it themselves. But if you give them welfare, then they're just going to live off of that their whole life or whatever, right? And the the left says, well, it's next to impossible to climb out of that type of poverty, and there are people in this bracket no matter what. So are you saying that we should not help them? You know? And so I think it's like everybody wants everybody to be relatively wealthy and well off or whatever, but some people think like people just
Yeah, you froze for a minute. You there now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry,
I
I lost you in the middle of what you were saying there.
yeah, no, I noticed. I don't remember what I was talking about. Um,
I think you were talking about politics and how people have different political values. Like some people value helping, like how both liberals and conservatives value helping the poor, but they value doing it in different ways, and the that makes each side think that the other side doesn't care about the same values.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. Basically, that's what I was saying. That people don't people think that other people are like inconsiderate when in reality it's just that they disagree on the way of taking care of the problem. They both sides recognize that there's a problem. They just disagree on how to fix the problem. And you see that with like economic concerns. But one of my biggest things is like stuff like wars. Like nobody none of the fucking people want a war. So how is it that just is always happening even though nobody is like supporting it really?
That's a good question. I think that a lot of that is due to like financial interests in there being wars. At least that's probably one of the factors.
Sure. I mean, so my dad works for Lockheed Martin, which
Oh,
I like I never knew growing up too much about it. I thought it was like always like super cool that my dad built like, fighter jets for the military or whatever. But then, I learned a little bit more and I'm like, Dad, you're working for like the military industrial complex, right? And he's like, and this was later on, in our life and whatnot. So back when I was a kid, I never would have like thought anything of this or whatever. But so he he basically said like, yeah, I know, but it's a job. So like he's doing that because it's a paycheck and he makes decent money. But that's why he's doing it, not because uh he believes anything one way or the other, necessarily. It's just a job for him. And so yeah, there's a ton of people out there making money off of the military industrial complex, but they're not all like, you know, war thirsty or whatever, for the sake of money. I know that there are like clearly certain people that are, and those are probably, the people who are running those companies, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Like people working in organizations that people regard as evil are not necessarily evil themselves, of course. Like it wouldn't even make sense really for everyone in Lockheed Martin to have bad intentions. That's like borderline impossible.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing that both Jonathan Haidt and Thomas Sowell talk about, particularly Thomas Sowell, I think maybe a little bit more than Jonathan Haidt, is how culture plays a huge role in the political ideologies that we end up following. And I think you know probably a little bit more about that than me because I still so far I've only watched like YouTube videos with old Thomas Sowell clips from that show. What was it called? Like fire? Oh yeah, Firing Line with William F. Buckley. But I still haven't read his books yet, or especially Black Rednecks, White Liberals, and Intellectuals in Society. So you probably have a better idea about his thoughts on that than me. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, so one of the to talk about Jonathan Haidt too, real quick. one of the things that he talks about is how it there's like a biological factor in your conservatism versus it can be boiled down to non-political, to where it's like your openness versus your like orderliness. So if you're high in orderliness, you're organizing things all the time, and you are not necessarily open to new things as much. And that would be like the conservative mindset, while the liberal mindset would be openness to new ideas and creativeness. So for instance, Jonathan Haidt says that your you know liberal thinking people are the ones that start businesses, but it would be a conservative person that keeps it running for years after it started, right? And so he says that you can like predict what somebody's political leanings are going to be um pretty well from like a really early age. So you can like determine from like with a 5-year-old that he is going to lean one way or the other. And then Thomas Sowell, so he talks more about culture as it like, so black rednecks and white liberals. He talks about how in particular in the South, there was a culture that was handed down from the southern parts of England, that the immigrants that moved to the South were from a southern part of England that was a hillbilly culture in England. So they were rednecks there in England, and those were the people that settled in the South. So when the Southerners incorporated slaves into their plantations and whatnot, they adopted the Southern redneck hillbilly culture from their slave owners. And so what uh, what ended up happening is, as the Southern white people moved out of poverty, they had to sort of like check their redneckism at the door. So they slowly, and so and this culture is like um so there's all these quotes from people like pre-Civil War era, and it's the pride culture, or the honor culture, that is part of it, that was like super strong. So they would fight to the death over somebody like looking at you the wrong way, and that was considered like valiant or respectable in that culture. So if your honor got insulted, it was something worth like going to battle over. And so uh and with that honor, you almost like you make yourself not want to educate yourself, because admitting that you don't know something would be an insult to your honor, right? So you almost like take pride in your ignorance, because you or your pride gets in the way of like losing your ignorance. But so as you accumulate wealth, that naturally goes away, because you're forced to incorporate yourself into a more polite society. And so the black people that migrated north after slavery uh sort of got rid of this particular culture and fared a lot better. They were rising like the economic ladder. And what Soul kind of like argues is that the the civil rights movement sort of messed up the black home in a lot of ways, because it told them that they should take pride in their heritage, which was like I'm not sure if this is the word, like, okay, like conflated, I guess, with um the fact that they brought that culture from Africa. But in reality they didn't. It came from the rednecks in England. And so it became like a a cultural or racial pride to like not um acclimate to the rest of polite society or whatever. So he argues that this is what um sort of like created a lot of the ghettos in the first place, and it was like a migration of the southern blacks to the northern states and whatnot that created the ghettos there, bringing that particular culture with them. And he argues that um the well he points out, I don't know the validity, but he points out the fact that it was like 70% of um uh black females were married at any given time in like the 50s, and the number, slowly declined, but that in like by 1980 the number was at 30% were married, and like 60% had never been married before at all. And so, you know, it's the focus is on culture, but what he gets out of it has a lot to do with economics and welfare and that sort of thing. When he talks about, like, in the other book, Society and Intellectuals, what he what his premise is, which he talks about culture throughout that book as well. Like all of his books kind of, well, I can't speak for all of them. I've only read a few of them, but from what I've heard, and he's written a ton of books, and they all sort of like he puts one out every year, so he repeats himself a lot or whatever. But in Society and Intellectuals, what he talks about is how people whose career it is to push policy, who don't create a product, right? So politicians and a lot of research professor type people, they don't create a product, so they have to create a problem in order to sell a solution, right? Their career depends on them coming up with solutions to problems. So it's not like an intentional thing, but some, like, what he argues there is that a lot of the intellectuals pushing policy are creating problems that are making things worse in order to like have something to do, so to speak. And then it like, and then they, when they leave office, it they made their money, they're they had a career, and now everyone's left to deal with whatever shit that they like fed us. And that kind of like really relates, I relate to that from like my anarchist sort of ideas. Like I feel like every time you make a law, you're taking away something in order to make it safer, right? Like that's essentially what all the rules and laws and whatnot are. So I feel like everyone needs, you know, some sort of like issue to deal with for their time. And if it's always going in the make another law direction, then what you end up getting is like just more and more laws, and next thing you know, we're living inside of like padded rooms hooked up to VR and living life through VR, which, I mean, we might end up choosing to do that anyway, but I always say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And to me, like, you close a park after dark because, you know, people can get like mugged in the park, but you also just made it so that like nobody can go look at the stars at night if they live in the city, you know? And it's like it's a public park, like who gives a shit if it's dark outside, you know? If I want to choose to like endanger myself by going into the dark, I should be allowed to, you know? That's the way. So that's why I'm always kind of like less is more, because it's a selfish reason for me, because I don't want the protection over the freedom, the opportunity.
Okay. Yeah. I'm like sympathetic to some anarchist views too, I would say, and I totally agree with what you said there. Like some, like a lot of the times laws are made that are really like unnecessary and don't help anyone at all. And like that's why I've been, especially in the past, I've been really sympathetic to like the minarchist way of looking at the world, which is kind of like an anarchist slash like minimalist libertarian way of looking at it. Just having the government provide the bare necessities like roads and police protection and protection of property and stuff like that. But
Right.
one of the ways that I kind of like see value in lots of different political perspectives too is that I even like some aspects of socialism, for example, because like for example, I understand that there like for, especially from hearing from libertarians about it, that there are lots of problems with things like social health care and social welfare programs, uh, but like there, regardless of how you decide to solve the problem, there are going to be people who are incapable of working, like who are physically or mentally disabled, who still require houses and money and food and clothing and stuff like that. And in terms of social health care, that's one of the reasons why I'm glad that I live in Canada, because my mom has a lot of serious health conditions and she's been in the hospital a lot. So it would probably at least cost a lot of money if we didn't have social welfare or social health care rather, in terms of like hospitals and stuff like that here. I'm not saying that you're disagreeing with stuff like that though. I totally agree with like the and sympathize with the kind of the anarchist perspective on a lot of stuff for sure. And yeah, with what you said about Jonathan Haidt in terms of politics. I've That's one thing that both him and Jordan Peterson have talked a lot about too, about how liberals start companies and conservatives run them. And that's, to me, what's important from that is that they both emphasize over and over again, because of stuff like that, that we need liberals and conservatives. There isn't
Right.
like one more right way of looking at it too. And what you said about culture with in terms of Jonathan Haidt, or not Jonathan Haidt, Thomas Sowell, was interesting too, because like in terms of the honor culture, for example, that tends to often be more associated with like conservative political views, and then like the opposite type of culture of that seems to be more associated with more liberal ways of looking at the world too. So like yeah, like all of these things are inexorably connected in a way too. So that's why it's so good to learn about them and like to talk to each other and learn about different perspectives, because it's ways of like correcting things that you might have missed as much as possible, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. There's something I was gonna say about. Oh, so I was thinking about this earlier. Earlier today, I was reading this book, or listening to an audio book, and I totally stumbled on it, and it's like right along the lines of like a Jonathan Haidt type of thing, but they're talking about the mind, and so I'm only a few chapters in, and um, it's called "The Secret Life of the Mind" by Mariano Sigmund.
Okay,
But
I've heard of that, but I haven't read it.
he's like doing he's referencing all these experiments that they did with like babies, or toddlers or whatever. And like basically what he's saying is that the mind has actually already has like a blueprint for a lot of the more complicated things that we do, and that like our as we mature, our ability to, you know, do sophisticated things is not that we learn the sophisticated things. It's more that we learn how to like turn off the automatic um actions that our brain already knows to do. So for instance, like babies, like when they are trying to play with something and their hands aren't like handling it very well, it's because their mind is already like working at the problem, but they can't um like their hands haven't caught up yet, and they like know before they learn any language they can differentiate between different languages. So like if they play a recording and the baby's got a sucker in his mouth, they've got a sensor on the sucker to see how hard the baby is sucking on it. This is a way to measure the baby's like reaction, right? So they'll play a language, say English, a bunch of phrases in English, and then they'll switch to Japanese, and the baby will like show surprise, or like not surprise, more like he mentioned Maggie from The Simpsons, like pique their interest, like, oh, that's a different language. And then furthermore, like they played the phrases all backwards to see if like it was just the change in the sound, not like a structural thing or whatever, and it did not work when they play it backwards. So when they play it backwards, the babies just hear it as random noise. But when they play phrases in English, the baby knows that that's like a language, and then when they play it in Japanese, the baby knows that that's a different language. But it knows
Oh,
that those are languages and not just random noises.
okay.
So so
Oh,
like
that's really cool.
so he talks about how that can like lead to like um how easy it is for people to learn multiple languages when they're young. But he also talks about how the trick that the babies are using is that they're listening to the beginning of like the sounds, and that's like an indicator for like what's going to come next. So it's similar to your suggestions on your like keyboard on your iPhone or something, right? Where it like suggests a word when you're halfway through typing it. So our brains are going to do that for us automatically. So you start to like already know like what the options are that's going to come out based on like the beginning of the sound or whatever. So you can get like you can take shortcuts that way and like jump to conclusions. But that also means that we do that with like so many other things too. So for instance, we can like when we're reading an article on someone that is controversial and we already have one opinion about it, we're already going to be like leaping to the conclusions based on the evidence that we see for like what we want, what we're expecting to hear, or what we want to hear, you know, as opposed to like the opposite, which we're not expecting or we're not interested in. So
That
our
makes
brain, like
sense.
sort of as a efficiency mechanism, will totally like take all these shortcuts that make that like cut out our conscious perception of what's actually happening, and we like, you know, it's just like an optical illusion where your it's this your eyes do the same exact thing where they they want it to be a certain way because that makes sense, and so it'll like look that way to you, but like then when you look closer you realize that it's something totally different, you know, like an optical illusion, whatever it might be or whatever, you know.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. That kind of reminds me about how, like, one thing that I've talked about often is that like basically like through the process of evolution, our brains have evolved this tendency where we ignore relevant data so we can like run away from that lion over there in the grass and ignore all other information. So our brains like never really truly process what's actually like all of what's actually going on, because our brain makes shortcuts because that's what helped us evolve. And what you said about language in that book was really interesting too. It kind of reminds me about how, you know, how Noam Chomsky, one of the things that he's the most famous for is his idea that there are like innate language structures in the human brain from birth. So that's really
That,
interesting
that's
with what
that's
they
like
were talking
exactly.
about, how like a baby recognizes that a language is different even before they can understand what different languages are and what language even is.
Yeah, it's like uh um genetic memory. So it developed over time is the theory, right? And in this book, actually, I forgot until you just brought that up, but he mentions that if if um if it's something that we like genetically developed over time, then it would likely be that like a previous version of us would have a lesser form, but the same thing. So they did like the same test with chimps, or I don't think it was chimps. I think it was a different primate, but they could recognize like the differences in different languages and whatnot as well. So like not as good as like babies or whatever, but the point being, like it's been like slowly developing over time in the genetic code because even non-humans have it.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that non-humans have it too, but that makes sense for
Like
other species.
primates can have like a similar blueprint for language in them as well. Is I guess the test concluded or whatever.
That makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense for other similar species to us to have those language structures too. Yeah, I actually I wrote a blog about this a long time ago called "Is Language Genetic?" because I was looking into that because I had heard it and I wasn't sure if it was correct, but then I learned that there's this gene that people associate with language called FOXP2, and it's associated with lots of other things too, because of course genetics is a lot more complicated than the gene does this one thing and this one thing only,
Right.
and that's what it was built for. So it might have even been evolved for something else, but it seems like
Right.
there's getting to be more evidence that FOXP2, perhaps in combination with other genes too, might be responsible for something like those innate language structures or whatever they might be.
So w- one of the things that he said in the book was that the uh that people children who are bilingual, he mentioned Catalan in particular because they switch between Catalan and Spanish in the same sentences a lot of times. So um so they actually have to uh switch back and forth between the languages very rapidly. And so that activates like the language center in their brain, which then translates later in life. They did tests where they used like colors associated with shapes, and then and you had to like press a button for the color that was associated with the shape, or it was a test or whatever about, and then they switched it up and they used directions instead of shapes. And so the children that were bilingual were able to switch back and forth rapidly between colors and shapes, like in the little game pattern that they were playing, versus people who were not bilingual. It didn't activate that part of their brain, and so it took them a lot longer to like make the connection that they were going for or whatever. And there's something else I was going to say, but I forgot. I'm sure I'll remember in a minute.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. That makes sense too. And but yeah, that reminds me of like the idea of neuroplasticity too, which is I'm sure you know about how like until I don't remember when it was exactly, but I think relatively recently in human history, like even really recently maybe, people thought that like once your brain gets to a certain age, you can't really learn anything new, but then they discovered neuroplasticity, which is why like com um like going against that old notion that you can't teach a dog new tricks. You actually can teach an old dog new tricks rather. So like
Right.
we can all learn languages, but obviously it seems like there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's easier when you're a child, especially like when you have that developing brain, you're just like soaking up information like a sponge and how to exist in the world and stuff like that. So it makes sense that you would have like those more deeply ingrained into your brain and even maybe your physiology or something like that if you learn stuff like that when you're younger.
He addresses that and says that when you're an adult and you try to deliberately learn a new language, you don't use the same mechanism because you're trying to learn the language. Whereas when you're a kid, you are not trying. You're like forced to because people are speaking it to you from multiple like sources. And so in that particular situation, your brain makes those shortcuts that I was talking about because you're trying to do it as efficiently as possible because it's a necessary means of survival and you're, trying to figure it out as quickly as possible or whatever. Whereas when you're an adult and you're doing it deliberately, you're like intentionally trying to learn the entire word, the entire sentence, as opposed to making like making like the assumptions based on the beginning of the sounds or whatever that he talks about. So it's like it's like it's not that it's specifically harder or easier for adults or children, it's that by the time you're an adult, you're using a different form of like learning than as a child. Just
Oh,
in
that's
general, like
fascinating.
the process, the reason why you're learning the way you are and whatnot as a child is different than the reasons why you're learning as an adult.
Oh, that's fascinating. So like your brain is more efficient at making those shortcuts when you're not trying to learn a language and when you have like almost inevitably have this added context of like why I'm learning this language. This is a language. I should learn these words. This is how these words work and why I should learn them and all that kind of stuff.
Which is like an example would be people always say that it's way easier to learn by going into the country and just immersing yourself there and being forced to speak it with everybody there or whatever, being forced to use it to like, you know, get a cab or whatever it is. When it's like a necessity like that, your brain starts analyzing it in that like survival type way or whatever, where or efficiency seeking way or something. I'm not sure. I don't want to mess up what he says, but it but the parallel is there or whatever, the example.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's really interesting. So did you remember what you forgot a minute ago?
No, I was just
No?
thinking. I was
Okay.
just trying to think of that too.
Okay.
No, it's cool.
Okay. Was there anything else you want to talk about?
Um, maybe I'll make another book recommendation along the same lines. You may have uh heard about it because I'm sure I heard it on one of the podcasts that I listened to, but the Talent Code by Daniel Coyle.
Oh, I've read that. I've read that one a while ago. Yeah, that one was really interesting
He
too.
talks about the myelin that wraps around the neural connections in your brain that is like the biological uh thing that we call skill basically.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember I remember now that you mention it that like when you're learning something, what you're doing is you're myelinating your neuronal connections in your brain associated with that. I remember one of the examples from the book was that like when you're learning how to play tennis, as you get better at it, you you myelinate the neuronal connections associated with behaviors or actions like developing a more efficient swing, putting the right amount of force into the racket when you hit the ball, and all sorts of different like necessary little things that you don't even necessarily think about that much. And it kind of like makes them more intuitive. And because the way that you get better at learning about something is by making it more intuitive so that you don't have to like consciously think and analyze about it as much. And I think it was yeah, it was Malcolm Gladwell. I think he also talks about that, and I don't remember which book of his it is. It's either The Tipping Point or Blink, I think. He basically talks about that same idea in terms of intuition anyway, about how like firefighters, for example, if they're more experienced, they've developed the intuitions to like for example, sense when a load-bearing wall is about to collapse if they're going into a place to rescue someone in a building that's on fire. And what happens is that their intuitions process the signals like the smell of the smoke and the visual signals on the wall that tell them that it's about to collapse, and their brain processes that before they even realize that it happens, and then it gives them this intuitive warning that that's about to happen, basically. So yeah, they have like similar ideas in that sense. What else did you remember from that book about that in terms of uh, like language and learning new skills, all that kind of stuff? You still there? Oh, I think we lost Devendra for a second there. Okay. Hopefully he's back in a second there. Oh, you back? I think I lost you for a minute there. Did
yeah,
you?
you were talking about firefighters being able to intuit like they were sensing the different things, the different characteristics that indicated like that the load bearing wall was going to collapse before they actually like consciously got a chance to like investigate the situation.
Yeah, that's it. That's basically where I left off, and then I think I lost you for a second there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have anything else that you remember that was really interesting about that talent code book?
Um well, I was going to say he wrote another book called The Culture Code that I have not read yet
Oh, I haven't
that
read that one
just
yet
came
either. I didn't know about that.
out. And we've been talking about culture, so I thought it pertinent to like mention that. Um, you were talking about the um, oh well, I think I wanted to point out that the myelin wrapping around or whatever is like essentially like insulation, right? And so you want to you don't want to be thinking about something when you're doing it. You want to be doing it without thinking about it, right? And like any like athlete knows that like your performance goes down if you're like, overthinking it. Like if you're playing basketball and you can't shoot, it's probably because you're thinking too much about it. And what you need to do is turn that off and just like let it happen, right? And I mean, Mark Manson wrote a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which was like super popular
I love that book.
because yeah, I read that too, and it's like his whole point was that he talks about Bukowski and how he was like a shitty drunk writer or whatever, that like and people loved him for it, and he was like unapologetic about it. He wasn't trying to be better than he was or whatever, right? And he said, and most people, like when they stop trying is when things start happening for them. And that's not to say like, stop getting up, like if you're trying to like get a business going, that doesn't mean like stop working on it or whatever, but stop seeing it as like a sort of life or death situation or whatever, and like say, all right, fuck it, if it does or doesn't happen, no big deal, so and you could like apply that to just about anything, whether it be like trying to ask a girl on a date, if you're like really shy, that can be like next to impossible. And the fact that it feels that way is the thing that's going to ensure that you don't get the date, right? Like there's nothing more that a girl like I feel like confidence is one of the most important things for like a girl, as a guy, like if you don't have confidence, then it comes off like in a really bad way, even if it's like that with anything. Like I used to think when I first started doing interviews, like for some random like pizza joint or something like that, I was super nervous. I'm sure I did horrible in the interview, but I didn't see how it could go any better either, because I was like, what the hell are you supposed to do? Like it's just a couple of dumb questions, and like, and then after 15 years of like working in a bunch of different, um, restaurant jobs in particular, but other jobs as well, eventually I got really like, confident at interviewing because I'd done it so much and because I was typically staying in the same industry. So, you know, my resume was good enough that I didn't really, feel like I had to prove to anything to anybody, right? It kind of spoke for itself or whatever. And, eventually, like now I think my ability to interview is like possibly better than, like, I can make myself look way better than I actually am pretty easily, and it's just because I walk in there and act extremely confident, almost like to a fault. But I'll tell them that, don't worry, you'll be impressed or something in so many words. Like I won't say that directly, but and 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 it works really well. Like it's clear that the confidence was what I needed, and that's what they want too, is somebody with confidence, right? Like if you're looking to hire somebody for your job and they have no experience or confidence in whatever, then you don't know, But if somebody has plenty of confidence, then all right, this guy probably knows what he's doing a little bit. Or at the very least, like even if he doesn't know what he's doing, I'm not gonna have to like babysit him or whatever. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like a lot of the time we tend to just overanalyze things too much and worry about things. And sometimes if we just I mean, this is easier said than done, but if we can just work our way to like just stop worrying about it and just be in the moment and try to be confident and just do what you're there to do in terms of like a job interview, or if you're wanting to ask out a girl or something like that, like, yeah, just confidence and like making it clear that you're there and you're in the moment with that person, whether it's like a potential employer or like a girl that you like or anything like that. If you just stop giving a fuck so much, often things work out a lot better. Like even for things like this, my YouTube channel here, for example, for I kind of learned the lesson a long time ago that with things like this, for example, with any creative things that I'm working on, I often start to think way too much about the details because I'm a really hyper analytical person sometimes. But I just kind of learned a long time ago that if I just try to focus on the simple things like, okay, how do I start this? Okay, I'll start it, and then to use the popular metaphor, I'll just jump off the cliff and figure out how I'm going to land before I get there. I try to have that
Yeah,
approach a
yeah.
lot more often.
Well, you know, if you're trying to build skill, you have to do it, right? I mean that's like like the way to build the myelin is to practice. And so I have the same problem where I have it all up here, but when it comes to doing it, I want to create like something that's like doesn't have any holes, but in reality, just doing it is what's gonna like make me good at it and give me the confidence to make something, that's that I can be proud of or whatever. And like with my podcast, I've just been talking to my microphone, and I haven't put anything out yet, but I've just been like doing that as a way to like learn to speak to a mic. I mean,
That makes sense.
I
Yeah.
I like with your channel, I don't expect to have a guest all the time. So, you know, I would almost like have like an hour-long rant every day, on a podcast if there were people that actually like were interested in hearing that. And I might even do that anyway, just as like almost like a diary, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like to a certain extent, I think that I mean it's understandable to try to find a niche and try to find things that will attract more viewers and stuff like that. But I mean, for me, so far, I've done a bunch of different things. Like at first, and I'm still going to continue to do all of these things. At first, I was just like make a video about basically like a short video about me talking about a particular topic, talking about ideas, and then I also I'm writing a novel, and I also started reading the novel chapters on my YouTube channel for people who prefer audiobooks to actually reading the actual words in books. And I post like I tend to post like my creative work. Sometimes I read my more creative work on there too. And then I recently started talking to more people, and I like doing all of that stuff. So I figure I might as well just keep doing this stuff, the stuff that tends to get more viewers and the stuff that tends to get less viewers. And then with the stuff that tends to get more viewers, it can help me get more attention for the other stuff that tends to get less viewers as I get like more people who are interested in what I have to say and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Right, right. I kind of my dream is to eventually have like a super like multimedia all incorporated type of thing, so that and this is actually something that I wanted to do when I was young, like my entire life. I wanted to like make a movie that I I directed, but I also like wrote the book and the screenplay for, and I wanted to uh, create or produce the soundtrack and the music for it. And um, I basically wanted to have like a product that was like my magnum opus that encompassed like all of the various mediums that I was interested in. And it's crazy because I feel like I kind of came like full circle, and now I'm like actually able to like work towards doing that. And
Oh, okay, that's cool.
it's like so for instance, I've got myself on like my own little education regimen, but I'm doing like a lot of um sciencey type stuff like philosophy, psychology. I have some a bunch of the great courses
Yeah, I like those.
to do some studying with. But so I've got Adobe's full suite now, the Creative Cloud or whatever. So I've got all their programs, so I can do Adobe Premiere for videos, and I can do Illustrator for graphic design, and Photoshop for graphic design and photos, and Audition for sound. And I probably wouldn't want to use that for like music production, but you know, at the very least, I can learn a bit about sound using. So anyway, so it's like I have all of the tools at my like disposal now, So I now have like the means to do this sort of thing. I saved up this past summer and bought this particular laptop so that I could have a something that can handle like a little bit of graphic type work or whatever, and I'm like I had moved into a bus to where now I don't pay rent, so I don't have to work all the time. And I just recently got like figured out how to get my phone turn my phone into a hotspot, right? So that's actually why we've been disconnected a couple times, is because it's not the the best thing. But I use a prepaid Verizon plan instead of like a contract plan. And so they screw you over and don't let you use the hotspot properties on it or whatever.
Oh,
But somebody clued me into a particular app that you can get off of the Android store that basically it disguises it but allows you to use it as a hotspot. So
oh,
anyway,
okay.
so now I've got, basically a studio on wheels, and I'm not paying any overhead. And so all I have to do is like work a few shifts at a restaurant to make enough money so that I can like do the studying and whatnot that I want to do, and try to start creating that stuff. But like you said, like it's the doing where you do the learning. So, it took me a while to get to this place, but now that I'm here, I'm like trying to actually like start doing stuff, start writing stuff, start making videos and that sort of thing.
Awesome. And yeah, once you start doing it regularly, it just becomes normal, and then it becomes a lot easier to manage it too. It sounds like I'm similar to you in the sense that I haven't gone for like the path of a traditional career or anything like that, especially lately within the last year or so, I would say. I've just tried to focus more on doing creative things like my YouTube channel and writing and stuff like that. And then I started doing like some tutoring, which is pretty part-time, and I like that I can like be my own boss with that kind of stuff. And then I just do odd jobs like helping people move and stuff here and there and stuff like that, because even though I could make more money going the traditional career route, I prefer doing this kind of stuff for the most part a lot, I would say.
I totally agree with you. Like I feel the same exact way, and I I got really jaded because I liked learning, and when I went to college, I made a lot of my own mistakes, but I also didn't have anybody really like um trying to keep me on the hook or whatever for or keep me responsible and whatnot. But uh but I got really jaded, and I landed in the restaurant business, and I learned to excel at that. And so for a while that was the only dream that I thought that I could have. But um you know, on Mixed Mental Arts we talk about the new smart is being able to learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? And so I feel like I'm in a really good position because I've been um like I haven't been indoctrinated, but at the same time, like I've forced myself to teach myself a bunch of new shit all the time. And so if there's one thing I know how to do, it's like learn something new. And so I figure the the barriers to like the the future of jobs and whatnot is going to be yourself, right? It's not going to be like whether you have a piece of paper from this particular university. It's going to be like what you can. I mean, you might have like certificates for particular courses that show that you've like mastered some particular skill. You know, if you're I think that might actually be like the future of education to a certain degree, is like getting course certifications in specific things that particular companies like look for. You know, if you know if you can, you know, take this course and do this particular test, then we know you know how to, you know, do this particular tech job or whatever. But uh but the internet's the great equalizer. So I mean, if you got a computer, then you can educate yourself and you can essentially like do whatever you want in the field of anything technology. And because technology advances so quickly, everything's outdated like 5 years later, right? So everyone's starting at ground zero all the time, right? You don't have people that like have a PhD in Java because, you know, Java's not going to be here that long. Fuck. Cut out again.
Oh, I lost the tail end of what you just said there after Java's not going to be here that long.
Uh, I think after that, I just said fuck because I could tell that it cut out.
Okay.
um,
It didn't completely fail this time though, at least. Yeah,
well,
like
yeah, it froze for me, so I thought it was about to like completely disconnect, but it didn't. Yeah.
yeah, I thought that too because it did that for me too. Yeah, I think like learning how to learn is probably the most important thing to learn in terms of learning. And yeah, like in terms of the new technology in particular, like learning how to do live streams and stuff like that and set up a YouTube channel and all that kind of stuff. I've had lots of help from people who know this kind of understand this kind of stuff better than me, but oh, we're back. You still there?
Yep.
Yeah, I lost my connection for a second this time.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it froze
yeah.
again.
I was just saying that, yeah, like with this YouTube channel and stuff like that, I've had help from a lot of people who understand this stuff better than me, but a lot of it I've just learned by doing it, and it seems like daunting at first, but then the more you do it, the easier it becomes, like with learning anything, basically, right?
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, I don't I haven't like even explored what running like a live stream might entail. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure that, you know, I wouldn't have trouble figuring it out eventually or whatever. But I you know, um, anyway, I guess the only thing that the only reason I don't know is because I haven't like tried it out yet. Right? Is what I'm saying. Like the only thing stopping me is me, and it hasn't
Yeah.
been a priority yet because I haven't really had anything to live stream yet. But um, I I played around with Adobe has like a program for building applications. So it's like it's not code, but you can like put together application like an app for your phone or something. So for instance, if you have a blog, you could build like a standalone app for your blog where somebody would, open up your app or whatever, and you could design it however you want instead of having like it linked through like Facebook or something like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Which what I want to do is eventually like sort of build my own interactive thing altogether. So I want to end up like coding or whatever and making like an app that, not specifically an app necessarily for your phone or whatever, but I want to portray like visually a lot of the sciency ideas that I have in my head, like the pseudo philosophical sciency like ideas, like a visualization for what like time would be, uh like so just the fact that time is like something that the way that we perceive change and whatnot, but that time doesn't actually really exist as like a location or whatever, right? Um so I feel like in my head I can see that in a particular way that makes sense, but I've never seen anybody else like make a visualization that shows that. So I want to be able to like do stuff like that, like little animated videos or something where it like zooms in and out in order to show something that's more complicated than, like you can't exactly portray four dimensions because we can't like really see that or whatever, but some people can do it a little better than others with, visualizations. So yeah, I got that kind of idea going or whatever.
Cool. That's a great idea, man. That would be awesome.
Because sometimes like all it takes is like, well, you have to be able to visualize something really to be able to understand it almost anyway. But sometimes like, you know, language, you're supposed to be painting a picture. Sometimes like actually painting that picture like is a little bit easier for somebody to grasp, if you actually show it to them instead of like trying to explain it.
Yeah, that's why people like, well, one of the reasons anyway for why people like YouTube videos more than blogs, generally speaking.
Right, right. Yeah. It's so much easier to watch a how to on YouTube than to read about it on a blog.
Yeah, yeah, for the most part. Yeah, that's a great idea, man. I'm looking forward to watching those videos when you start doing that. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, cool.
All right, well, is there anything else that you can think of that you want to talk about?
No, I think
No?
unless you got anything, I'm free.
Uh, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head right now. So we can just end it here for this time. It was great to talk with you, man. Thanks so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'll
dude.
just, yeah.
I was gonna say,
I'll just say the things that I like to is here, and then I'll let you just say anything else you want to say, and plug any of your stuff that you're working on or anything like that. All right,
cool.
all right. All right. So for everyone watching, thanks a lot. Thanks so much for watching our conversation here. Hope you enjoyed it. And thanks everyone so much to everyone who's already become my patron on Patreon and who's subscribed to my YouTube channel. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. It means a fuck of a lot to me. And uh, and also, I love you all, and keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And always remember this: the funk cures all. All right,
Nice.
so anything else you want to add there, Kavender, and any of your stuff that you want to plug there?
Uh, well, I just wanted to say if you ever want to do this again, I would love to, and maybe maybe I'll try to do it earlier in the day because I don't have a lot of light in my bus at night. Or I mean, I could go to like a coffee shop or something like that. But as far as plugs go, if anybody is at all interested, I don't really have any like much content out there right now. I do have a website and I've got a few blog posts on it, but you can either search for Van Life with Woodpecker or my website is vanlifewithwoodpecker.com. And I've got, you know, various social media and whatnot, but that's all under the same moniker, Van Life with Woodpecker.
All right, I can I'll add the link for your website to the description of this video there too. And yeah,
Cool.
of course, I'd definitely be open to talking again, man. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, cool.
All right, cool, man. Thanks so much for talking. So I'll stop the broadcast here now. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching and listening. Adios.